And then you don't really know if you're live or not. That's even the worst part. And there's usually a little thing that pops up. But all right, we are live now. There we go. Jen, welcome to the show. So good to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. We're going to have a ton of fun.
Absolutely. So we're talking about leading real change. And my podcast is all around hitting peak performance. And the reason why this topic stuck out to me when I got your pitch was because you literally had it in the pitch of this topic. It's like leading real change to achieve peak performance. So let's hit that part first before we start getting into the how and stuff like this. So, why leading real change is going to help leaders out there hit that peak performance, for whether that's, with themselves, their teams, or their organizations.
So there's several things that kind of come to my mind when I think about leading real change. And, when you think about our world, obviously it's always ever changing, it's evolving, things are just moving in very quick pace these days. And there's no signs that any of that will slow down. And so when I think about the leadership competencies of not our past leaders, but of our future leaders, and I think about some of the competencies that will make them successful, I think about, conversation agility. I think about decision agility and leading in a way where it's very agile so that you're riding the wave of change, you're not fighting it. And I think that's what we've done in the past is fight change instead of learning how to be really good within it and leading our team in it.
I really like that. I like that aspect of not just right now, but the future leaders out there. So you talked a few things about decision agility. I want to dive into that one a little bit deeper, shall we? Because that one really piqued my interest. So I've had a number of agile coaches on the show before, most notably Chris Williams from Badass Agile. But decision agility is not necessarily something that's popped up. So let's dive into what that is and what that looks like. I'm throwing you a full hockey sock here for a good Canadian analogy. So what is that? What does it look like? And how do leaders achieve it?
So decision agility, when I think about that, I don't think about the old school, like I have plan A, B, and C. And if this goes wrong, I'll do B. And if that goes wrong, I'll do C. Because you're creating those plans A, B, C with the information you have in front of you. But in our current world and our future world, we're making the best decisions we can with the current information. But if we get too attached to those decisions or too attached to those plans, as additional information surfaces or as something changes, we're not willing to see it or react to it or take it into consideration. And I think that's one of the skill sets that our current and future leaders have to get really comfortable with, making a decision and then down the road recognizing it has to change based on new information that's presenting itself. And we like to have certainty. I mean, our brains love certainty, but we can't lead in certainty because it doesn't work. And too often we try to do it and it just doesn't go well.
I love that aspect, that viewpoint. So by day, I'm senior Canadian Army officer. And I do this in my evenings, hence why we're here in the evening. But when we go through our basic level training, we go through a process that we like to call battle procedure, i.e., in the Army, how you get ready to step across the line of departure and go into battle. And there's 13 steps to battle procedure. And one of the key parts near the end is asking yourself, has the situation changed? And if the answer to that is yes, you go right back to square one. And it's so interesting out there how many leaders get stuck at well, yes, but too bad. I'm already in here. I'm already committed to this change or this decision. If I change my decision, I'm going to look weak or I have to, look the part that I have to stick to my decisions. So how can leaders go about, getting rid of the stigma of, changing my decision is bad? And how can they go about going, okay, accepting the fact, situations changed. Like you said, I have to now reevaluate.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting about the human brain is it actually can get addicted to being right. So when we're right, we get a dopamine hit and we like a good dopamine hit. It's the same one you get if you have some sugar or some shopping or, a substance of choice. You get a dopamine hit. And so what's happening oftentimes in the workplace when people aren't willing to say, hey, has this step 13, has the situation changed? I need to reevaluate and start over. It's because they need to be right. There's this sense of them that not only do they want to be right for those reasons that you said, they want to look smart, they don't want to look like they failed, they want to look like they're the boss, but there's also a need for that chemical reaction to being right. And so for leaders to manage inside of that environment, the environment that we all live in now, which is really evolving at any given minute, literally in the minute, we're sometimes changing our decisions. Those people who are going to do well in that have to not get attached to their own idea, but they have to get really attached to the result. And however we get the result, we get it. It doesn't matter. And I think that is where we fail sometimes, is that we're so attached to our idea, making sure the result's there, or our idea is the one that won. And, we're going to get some blue ribbon, I guess, if our idea was the winning idea. But what if we just got attached to the result, and wherever the idea or however that happens is okay? And it doesn't have to be about us as leaders. And I think that's the way we have to change our perception.
Love it. I told you before we hit record, you're going to be like one of my favorite guests, and you're already starting to hit that already. Um, I love the focus on the result part. And one of the things I often say is, in order to do that, we're not so focused on the one being right all the time and all this stuff, is that we can't be the smartest person in the room, right? Us as leaders, the leaders out there, when they're leading their teams or leading organizations, their job is to make the best decisions possible based off the information they got at that time. And you don't make those best decisions if you're the person who's the smartest in the room, because everything's so complex now.
Yeah, everything's so complex. And what's interesting too is another competency that I think about for future leaders is really the ability to lead teams doing a job that you don't know how to do.
Oh, yeah.
And people really struggle with that. They feel like, well, I was the expert at job A, and now I just manage a bunch of people who do job A. But again, the way the world is evolving, the job you did no longer looks the same. Even if you did it 18 months ago, it probably still doesn't look the same. And so people have to get really comfortable not knowing what someone's job is from an expertise standpoint. Obviously, we want to know what they do, we want to know how they contribute, we want to know their impact, but we don't necessarily have to know exactly the nuts and bolts of it. We have to be leaders who encourage people coming in to show their best skills, to be the smartest person in the room about the topic, and that you're leading the smartest people. You don't have to be that person. You don't have to know all of that. And it's not easy at times. You want to, again, we're humans, right? We want to look smart. We want to play the part of the boss. But I think, leaders who are going to be successful in today's world and into the future, they're going to be really good at assembling teams and assembling the right answer, not coming up with the right answer themselves.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I always say that being a leader is not about having the right answers, but rather asking the right questions, so that your people are the ones who that come with the right answers. And I like what you talk about, how we don't need to be the ones that know everything, because it's so impossible in this day and age, but rather going to be the ones that are in charge of those who know everything. And I often tell my coaching clients and stuff like this, I'm like, you need to be an expert. They're like, well, how can I be an expert? Like, an expert is you need to relook at the definition of expert. You need to be an expert in your team, i.e., you need to know enough to be dangerous, what everyone does. So when they can walk up to you, I'll give you an example. By training, I'm a logistics transportation officer, i.e., I move things, whether that's trucks, planes, ships, whatever. And I would go, when I was a transport platoon commander, I would go and drive every piece of equipment that I commanded, that my guys drove. Why? Just so that I had an understanding how it worked. So when the guys walked up to me and said, hey, we need to buy some new snipes and chains, I understood what the heck a snipe was and why chains were important. Because, well, if you don't have good chains, the loads don't get tied down well. And a tank rolling off a flatbed truck generally ends in tears and a lot of money and people getting fired. So never a good day. Never a good day. Although I do have a similar story about a contractor that we hired, but that's for another time. But the moral of the story is that, I was an expert, but I knew enough to be dangerous, right? I had an understanding of what the guys were saying to me and the girls were saying to me when they walked up to me saying, hey, we need this or this, this, we can't use that piece of, that vehicle because this part is broken. I'm like, okay, now I understand.
I think the other thing that's interesting when you think about asking questions, and yes, you should know enough to be dangerous, and you should know enough to have a viewpoint. But I think not only asking great questions, but asking questions you don't know the answer to. And that's also difficult. But when you ask questions that you do not know the answer to, what you're doing is you're creating an avenue for conversation. You're creating an avenue where your expert gets to teach, train, educate you on something. And because you would be able to listen to that in a way in which you're not an expert, you can then poke holes into it in a whole new way. And there's a lot of value to having enough information, but not too much. It keeps you really in a place of clarity and a place of curiosity. And that's when some teams do some really good stuff, when they have a really curious leader.
No, for sure. And it's kind of like you constantly come with a fresh set of eyes, right? When you're like that, because you're able to question the situation with that whole set of eyes and stuff like this. So definitely interesting stuff. And I love how we're going. So back to the topic of leading change. And I like the path we're going on and talk about, what new leaders needed to look at and how they need to be faced. How do you think the process of leading change, real change, and organizations or teams, because I look at them in two different contexts. So just to back up, I guess, is that here at Moving Forward the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast now, I refer to the 3 domains of leadership, and that is leading yourself, leading your teams, i.e. the individual people, and then leading the organization, i.e. the institution, right, of your company, your nonprofit, whatever it may be. So on the latter two, i.e. leading your teams and leading your organization, how do you feel, the direction leading change is going to move towards, and where leaders can really get hung up going forward?
So it's interesting when you think about best practice leadership skills that we've all been taught. Most of them were designed during the Industrial Revolution. And most of them were designed before we knew hardly anything really how the brain actually worked. And so when I look at today's world and I think about leading change and I think about leading yourself, leading your team, leading that institution, one of the things that you're going to have to start to understand is how does the human brain work? And understand that to really create change, you obviously have to live in a sense of innovation. And the only way you can live in a sense of innovation is a reduction of fear. Fear and innovation are north and south, east and west, dark and light. You can't have one without the other. And a lot of our best practice leadership skills are actually very fear-based. And as soon as you create fear, whether it's unconscious, conscious fear, anything that threatens the human body, and that can be as small as judgment or failure, then the innovation starts to go down. And when you're not innovating, you cannot change. And so when I think about future leaders, really their number one job is to figure out how to create the reduction of fear in the workplace so that innovation becomes key.
All right, let's answer that question. How can you reduce
How
fear?
can
And
you do it? Yeah, there's a
that's the
lot.
$1,000,000 question right there,
That is
right?
the
Like,
$1,000,000 question. There's a lot of things you can do. That's the good news. Number one, you have to get really comfortable using your language in a different way. Our languages create worlds. And so, for example, someone comes into your office and they have this amazing idea, and you can tell they're excited about it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I just thought of something I have to tell you. And they tell you, and you're going, that's a horrible idea. That will never work. And so often we're busy and we say to that person, like, that's not really actually a great idea. That's never going to work. I mean, yeah, great job, but and so we create this judgment for them, right? We judge them and we tell them their ideas aren't any good. And instead of saying that, what we can say is, hey, I can tell you're excited about, I don't see it, but change my mind. Make me see what you see. And then what happens is we celebrate that idea. We don't celebrate the quality of the idea. We celebrate the fact that someone brought an idea to you. Then we allow them to change your mind or tell you the reasons why. And what's interesting about it is you may find an idea in there that works. The other thing that's interesting about it is sometimes your mind, they do change your mind. And that's happened with my own team. You know, one of my team members, we play that game all the time, like change my mind. And recently someone wanted to do something from a marketing standpoint and I was heels in, dead set against it. And so I was like, all right, I don't see it, change my mind. And guess what? She did. She changed my mind. And I could have missed out on a really great idea if I had put her in a failure mode, fear mode. But I used language to celebrate her innovation. And when I didn't see it, I didn't judge her. I allowed her to help me understand her better.
you know, I get that meme popping up in my head of the guy sitting at the table with his cup of coffee, and pick one, right? It says something, and then underneath says "change my mind," and I just see you there in that right now. Like, I don't think this is going to work. Change my mind. I like that though, because you're not just shooting it down, but rather you're giving them an opportunity to clarify their position, to highlight the advantages of whatever they're proposing, giving them opportunity to explain how to mitigate the disadvantages, and get your buy-in into that. So I really like that whole just changing the language around and just making a safe place for them to discuss the option, the idea with their supervisor, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
And what I did in that conversation is, that time she did change my mind. Other times they don't change my mind. And that's okay. But what I've done is I've created an environment where I'm willing to listen. And if I'm willing to listen to that, there's going to be assumptions that I'm willing to listen to the truth in other ways. And I think that's one of the biggest problems when I look at work environments is leaders aren't willing to hear the truth. And people aren't willing to tell their leaders the truth. And there's fear on both sides of that. And that's one of the biggest problems we have today.
Oh, yes. Let's dive deeper. Let's dive deeper in this. I love it. I love the part where leaders, don't want to hear the truth, and then followers don't want to tell the leaders the truth. How does that even happen? Because I sit here in my role. One of my jobs, I command a squadron of 200 people, logistics squadron of 200 folks. And I don't if I don't have the right information, I can't make the best decisions. And that could result, in something damaging to the lives of 200 people. So how does it become suddenly a leader's in the position where people are like, let's give the boss false info because that's what he or she, they want to hear? How does that even happen in the first place?
Oh, it happens so often. It happens more times than not. And when I watch people, but what happens is, as a leader, you walked in one day and you said, why aren't we selling, this widget like we used to? And someone said, well, it's because of this. Nope, can't be that. Nope, you're wrong. Oh, okay. And then they say to someone else, how did you do that? Well, we did this way. Nope, nope, that can't be it either. Nope. I personally designed that marketing, so it can't be that. And so we don't hear the truth. And then again, we've told people they're wrong. So why would they ever want to sign up to be wrong with their boss again? And that's why they stop telling the truth. And again, if someone tells you the truth about why maybe something isn't selling or something isn't working and you don't believe it to be true, you can say, why do you believe that to be true? Tell me what you see. Tell me why that came to your head. What, based on your experiences, why did you want me to know that today? Instead of just saying, I don't believe you. And that's the problem, is leaders too often just say, I don't believe my people. And then therefore the people do not want to tell the truth.
Yeah, for sure. Or they end up, kind of, losing on their people, right? This isn't what I asked for. You heard a lot of story, rest in peace, Steve Jobs, but you heard a lot of stories about Steve Jobs and like literally throwing stuff at people and stuff like this, saying how garbage it was. So like, well, let's just give the boss what he wants and then it'll be happy. Right. And then ultimately that does lead you down a road though, where you are setting your organization up for failure, because suddenly you sit there, you walk in and you're like, all right, let's see the P&L reports, or pick TPS reports for this month. And then all of a sudden it's like, how the hell are we $1 billion in the red? I'm like, well, we've been telling you what you wanted to hear forever, and now the truth is coming out. And it's like, how do you turn that ship around? It's like this, it ain't the Ever Given in the Suez. No one's coming to dig you out.
There's no tugboats coming.
There's no tugs coming at that point. She's going down. So it's that you got to stay that. So let's look at it from a culture perspective, and how can leaders make sure that they keep that at the forefront of the culture that they develop within their organizations, to make sure that no one assumes that the wrong information is good to be brought forth, but rather bring the right accurate information forward all the time.
So again, our words create our worlds. And so you have to think about your language. And, if you want an environment where we tell the truth fast and furious and early and often, you have to set up conversations with that. And so, just in a touch base with someone on your team, just a regular touch base, at the end of that, you could always say something like, what did you not tell me that I need to know today to improve the company? And, oftentimes people say, well, is there anything else? You got anything else? I'm like, no, no, no. And the boss is like, great, because I am too busy. I don't have time to hear anything else. But if we stop and always say things like, tell me one thing I should know today that I didn't know yesterday that will help me be better at leading this company, that opens up some incredible conversations. And it's important to say, tell me at least one thing, because your boss is saying, tell me something. So guess what? They're going to tell you something. And then if they, tell you something and you accept it and you get curious about it, then again, they're going to tell you something again. And what's interesting is when you create an environment where you're asking those questions, then guess what? Your team will ask them of each other. Your teams will ask their cross-functional partners those same questions, because it's the culture in which you work. And that's the way you create cultures where people tell the truth fast and accurate.
Oh, it's so true. And to add on to that, it's making the space as a leader in your schedule, both daily and weekly, to get out there and have those conversations. So I'm going to go back to that job where I commanded that squadron. And we often do what we in the Army we call walkarounds. Like you get out of your office, you walk the lines. It's actually called walking the lines, where you walk around and you talk to people. So it was like probably one of my first times doing it after taking command of the squadron. And I was in one of our maintenance facilities, and I ran into one of my civilian employees. God love him, Tommy. And I was like, how are you today, sir? And he's like, you want to know how I am today? I'm like, yeah, I do. At 45 minutes, he gave it to me. He's the first time he met me, but he gave me the gears. And I didn't say, I got to go. Yeah, I was tight on time. We had to cut that tour short, but I went back at another time. But for 45 minutes, I just heard about the problems that were going on in that section. and how it was stifling performance, how it was crushing morale, how it was, killing production. Pick one, right? And it was all there, and I just needed to listen to him and take the time. Well, I felt like I got beaten up. Like I went 12 rounds with Tyson at his prime, with Tommy for 45 minutes. But I tell you, it was like, okay, now I know. All of a sudden, I know where my problem is. He gave me the solution, how to fix it. I didn't need to think about it myself. I just needed to create the opportunity for that to come out
Absolutely.
and implement it.
And you listened to him and you didn't shut him down. You didn't say, well, those problems are everywhere, or yeah, I'll get to it, I got bigger fish to fry. Like any of those things we could have said that would have told him, you know what, he really doesn't care, he really doesn't want to listen. And when people kind of come to you and they have those moments where they just got to get it all out, and you're like, I can never remember in my head all the problems they just gave me, closing out those conversations, you can say things like, I heard a lot today. What's the one thing that you told me that's the most important thing for me to act on? And allowing them to boil it down to one thing or two things allows you to act on it as a leader, because you can't fix all 700 things he gave you overnight, but you could look into the thing that matters the most to him, then send an email or call him into your office the next day and say, I heard the one thing you said, and I know there's a lot more, but I wanted to get your priority off the list first. Here's what I've looked in. Here's what I see. Here's what we're going to do. And then off they go. And what they'll have known then is their voice matters. Their voice has impact, and they're going to be more likely to tell you the truth in the future.
What I hear there is you not setting your priorities, but enabling your people to set them for you.
Yeah.
Right? Wow, that's a powerful statement and powerful thought, because normally it's completely the inverse. And what I would like to refer to that as is that's how bosses work. So here, moving forward, leadership, the tagline is, or tagline, sorry, not slag. Oof. Tagline is lead, don't boss. Because I'm trying to rid the world of those stereotypical horrible bosses out there and enable people to motivate, inspire, bring bonds together with their organization, with their people, and take care of them. And at the same time, there's a reason why we do that. Why? To achieve peak performance, to push our outputs up, to do better, whether that is, as a leader ourselves, as our team hitting peak performance, or our organization, mostly businesses out there pushing their bottom lines up, whatever that bottom line is. Maybe it's a business, maybe it's a nonprofit, doesn't matter. The goal, the ideology is still all the same, right? And when we actually enable our people to say, hey, this is where our priority, this is where your priority needs to be, you're getting the raw truth from the ground level. And they're the ones that are actually doing the job on our behalf. So if they're telling you it's a priority for me, that means it's 10 times a priority for them, because it's impacting them on a daily basis.
Yeah. And, I don't know what job this individual did, but my assumption is there was probably a bunch of people who did that same job, different shifts, different times, a lot of movement with that one position. And so if you can fix something that as a leader seems small to you, but is really big to that person, but there are 100 people doing that same job, you just fixed a problem for 100 people. And that is something really big. And when I look at organizations, when I look at executives trying to make really good enterprise decisions, but also doing the smaller things that make the day-to-day work. And if you're doing both of those at the same time, they will meet in the middle and you will do really, really big things. But too often we are so focused on enterprise decisions that these what seem like smaller decisions but have high impact sometimes get overlooked.
Right. So in Army terms, we talk about that's the divide between the strategic and tactical, right? I.e. strategic, big enterprise decisions, yada, yada. Tactical is ground level. How do I take care of task A through B while, doing X, Y, and Z? But it now brings up an interesting question, because as leaders, we do have to be aware of both, and we do need to take care of both, as you eloquently said. But when suddenly, a conflict arises, you take care strategic thing, you take care of the enterprise, take care of the tactical thing, you take care of the people. But the people are the ones that are doing the job on your behalf, i.e., getting the customers, bringing the money in, the ones that are doing it. But if you don't take care of the organization, it crumbles and you don't have the people because you can't pay them. So it's a big chicken or egg thing. So when those two things collide and are competing for your parties, what is your best advice out there for leaders to go, okay, where should I spend my time at? And and how do I deal with the leftover?
Oh, that's such a really good question. And, I think obviously it's a lot of it is situational, but I think that oftentimes you do have to make enterprise decisions that protect the organization and protect, as many jobs or as many livelihoods as you can protect. But you also have to be incredibly transparent to the team. And so if you cannot fix the problems for the team while you're saving the organization, then you need to be honest with how it is going. And obviously there's confidentiality, there's all that stuff that we know, but honesty can be as simple as we're going through a difficult time. We're making the best decisions we can make based on the decisions we have today. Some days will be good and some days won't, but overall, we're moving towards a better place and we're doing it as a team. And so it's just saying something. And I think oftentimes when things are really stressful and really hard, the executives lock themselves in that room or that floor. There's those buildings where there's like the 15th floor and you have to have special keys to get in the 15th floor. And when things go south, they kind of all go and hide. And when you're hiding and you're not telling the truth, or you're not, saying, I don't know what we're going to do, even if it's simply as simple as that, what's happening is everyone on your team is making up a story, and likely it's not accurate. And so that's how the human brain works. If you don't know something, you create a story. And because we're fear-based animals, we usually create a bad story. And so when you're hiding and not telling anyone anything, then the team is actually making the problem worse. The one that you weren't able to fix anyhow just got worse because all they're doing is talking about it and blowing it up and making assumptions and creating stories.
So interesting how things kind of go full circle, right? Because now we're back to getting out of your office, walking around, talking to your people, despite it being a time of crisis, because tactical issues can result into strategic downfalls, right? I like Kodak as a great example.
Me too.
Oh, but it's so interesting because someone walked into the board, I forget the gentleman's name, with like a prototype of the first digital camera, right?
Yeah, Steve Sasso.
Steve Faso? Okay, perfect. Oh, it's cool. Yeah, we use the same story. But so for the listener out there, Steve Faso walked into the board of Kodak with the prototype of the first digital camera and dropped it down and said, hey, check out what we could do. And the board laughed, I won't say, they essentially laughed him out of the room. They're like, we don't do photos. We sell film. And now where's Kodak? Right? So that's a whole thing about right back to the beginning, being aware, being present, being listening to your people, bringing these ideas forward, because guess what? Like you said, right at the beginning, the world changes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what's interesting about the Kodak example, it's funny, we both use that. I use it a ton too, is when you go back to that addiction to being right, the board that he presented this digital camera to, they were smarter than him. They knew what the customers wanted. They thought, because how it was created is you would watch your pictures on your TV and they were like, who would ever want to do that? That's weird. And they weren't willing to listen because they were so addicted to their own idea. And they made actually a ton of money off the digital camera because they owned the patent until 2012. But after 2012, then they filed bankruptcy because Apple and everyone else was no longer giving them money for their patent. I'm just grateful that they did turn it down. So there was no digital proof of, my college years. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, there's unfortunately some digital proof in my college years, although in comparison to today's standards, it's uber blurry and probably would not hold up in court, which is a good thing for me. But you know what, Jen, this has been a fantastic conversation. For the people out there, this has been streaming live, and this is something I'm doing now with the podcast more and more. So Jay out there is said that I've been studying leadership for quite some time. I've been listening to her today and learning. So that just gives you an idea of the quality that you've brought. And by the way, we're doing round two. We're going to do interview two, because I also know you pinpoint into talent acquisition and hiring in that range too. And that's a topic which I have not hit enough yet on the podcast. So audience up there, don't worry, Jen's going to come back because we've had too much fun tonight.
Right.
But let's wrap this episode down. Let's wind it down. Wrap it up. Before we do close it out, I got a couple last questions for you.
Okay.
First one is a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. According to you, Jennifer Thornton, what makes a great leader?
A great leader is someone who can create an environment where the reduction of fear is a daily task, and that they create an environment where people can be innovative, truthful, honest, and really do their best work.
Solid answer, to the point. Absolutely love it. And the final thing is, how can people reach you? How can they find you? How can they be part of your journey? Shameless plug. Have at it. It's all about you.
Woohoo! I love a shameless plug. So you can find more about us at 304coaching.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Jen Thornton ACC. And for our live listeners, if you connect with me, we are actually doing a free workshop series. We do it every year. It's called Leading Edge. And we have our free workshop series starting April 21st of this year.
Oh, cool. If you fire me a link, I'll throw that in the comments or the description of the videos out there. And for the live listeners, you can grab it. Again, for the podcast listeners, I am doing more of these interviews live streaming. So you better, follow me on social and just go to movingforleadership.com, scroll right to the bottom page. Every single social is there. And that's how you can find me. Again, Jen, thanks for coming out. Thanks for talking to us. Fantastic show. Absolutely loved it.
It was a ton of fun. And thanks for the great questions.